house. Okay.
Right.
I will. I have. That's it. At least I can come and yell through the window. So hold on one second. I think I can fix this. Okay. So.
Hey, Joe, can I ask a question? For the very first time, I'm seeing
Okay.
Can you hear me, Joe?
I can now. Everyone started moving again. So I believe this is really all of your fault. It's not me, right?
Can I just ask an administrative question? I'm seeing simultaneous transcription of our comments on the bottom of my screen.
Sure. Ira, if you bring your cursor to the bottom, so you can see the commands on the right, you'll see live transcript. You click that, and then you can say hide it.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing it right now, but I never knew that was.
This one of the categories of Lauren is magic.
No, that's no,
It's a Zoom option. You just have to, when you set it up on your account.
Yeah, okay. I never saw that. Good.
Yeah.
Sometimes it misspells things in a very peculiar manner, but it does its best.
I did a conference last Friday on energy justice, and one of our speakers turned it on, and I hadn't seen it function. It was really good. I mean, it did a really great job. Okay, so we've got Ira and Peter here for a limited amount of time. Lauren, do we have any members of the public out there, and members of the public, would you like to ask any questions or speak? That's assuming we have some.
We do, and Bob Hubbard is raising his hand. Go ahead, Bob.
Come on in, Bob.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we got you.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I know a couple of you, and you may know my name because I was on the government study committee prior to this committee. And I just thought I'd throw in my 2 cents on this because I read the minutes from the March meeting, and I think they're inconsistent with some of the findings from our committee and some of the salient points that were the majority position of the people on the committee, where I did not see those represented. So I felt it was important to kind of speak to that. Regarding, in particular, the town manager, I know there's other issues before your committee, but regarding the town manager, which was given quite a bit of consideration, and I will say that and I believe most of the members of the committee came in addressing that topic with a very open mind. But a lot of the discussion led the majority of us to reject the concept of a town manager for a variety of reasons. And I thought I'd like to point those out because in doing some of my research, both on the committee and after, there's quite a few towns approximately our size, some larger, some smaller, some in Connecticut, some Massachusetts, some in Arizona. But there's quite a few out there that have moved away from the town manager position for the most common reason is the lack of it being a representative government, the people not really having the voice that is presented. Which is a big concern of mine and some of the other members of the committee. And I know Bob Polito, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, he spoke to how he still feels personally that he feels that it's the right thing. But after a pretty thorough study of that, the idea was still rejected. And it kept coming up. It came up in our final presentation. I don't know why the final presentation spent so much time addressing something that we actually rejected, but it did. And so here we are, and I see it still coming up again. And I've heard a lot of fairly sound arguments for it, but at the end of the day, my biggest concern, and the concern I think I can speak for at least some of the members of that committee, was that when you move away from a representative government, that is perilous to our structure of government. We are a republic. We're a representative government. And that is the cornerstone of how we are structured. There was some discussion that it would remove politics from the process. And that really came down to being rejected because whoever is the presiding party at that time, regardless of who it is, basically gets to a point who is going to be the leader of the town, if you will, or have significant fiduciary responsibility over the taxpayers' dollars for an appointed amount of time. And they said, well, that will remove politics. Well, I posit that that is not the case. I posit that that will actually develop a certain level of resentment, as actually has been seen in some of the other case studies that are out there and available, open source on the internet. They have moved away from that because of the lack of representation. And also then what happens is, in the event of a problem with that particular appointee, which is typically on a contractual basis, it's very difficult to remove them without significant and costly litigation. There is a case even in, I believe it's Millbury, Massachusetts, where the town manager had to be removed for cause. They didn't really get in. What I did not see is the exact the reasons for the cause, but the government kept from the taxpayers and the voters what the actual settlement amount was, and it was, which suggests that it's a lot. And when we start having to hide the contractual obligations and the payments and in a separation agreement, that doesn't form a lot of trust between the voters and our town leadership. At the end of the day, having a person accountable to the voters by way of votes is significant. I mean, it's the foundation of what we are, and having appointed leadership is perilous. I have a real problem with that. That being said, there was also quite a bit of discussion about attracting quality candidates, because it's a difficult position, and it's very demanding. And there was, there's discussion about term limits, or not term limits, but the length of a term. Even in talking with Tom and various other people that have held selectman positions or mayor or what have you, a 2-year term is very aggressive. Now, that being said, I've heard from even some of you that the 2-year term allows us to sort of get people in or out. I've heard arguments to say, well, that's the if somebody's not working out, we get them out earlier than having to wait 4 years. But I've also heard that the burden of a campaign is tremendous, and to go through it every 2 years puts a burden on the person who should be focused on running the town. We don't really get a good, my personal opinion is we don't really get a good lens or an optic on how that person is going to perform in short 2 years. I look at poor Peggy right now, having come in with the pandemic on her plate. There's pluses and minuses all over the place. Is she doing the right thing? And that's not my point of this discussion. But it's very difficult to get a clear optic on their performance. But it's coming on a larger scale, though. I have a tremendous concern about a board of, say, the Board of Selectmen or an RTM type of government appointing somebody who has of any position like this, because it's akin to our Congress picking the president when you look at it on a grander scale. This is how socialism starts. It is not healthy to remove the voice of the people. Whether the people make a mistake or not, they are accountable for their vote. They are accountable for their voice. And if they could have picked somebody else, well, shame on them, but we cannot remove the voice of the people. That is just critical. It is a cornerstone of what our government is. Then another topic that came up frequently was the concept of pay, because if you want to attract good people, you have to pay them. And a town manager, there was discussion about having a higher salary for the town manager over the position of first select person. I posit to just pay the first select person more. You will attract, a larger candidate pool to get qualified, experienced leaders who understand organizational and behavioral management to come in and run an organization when they are at great putting a potential career on hold for just a potential just only 2 years, and they oftentimes have to dip into their own pockets to run things. You're going to get either an elitist group or you're not going to get the qualified candidates. I posit that what we should probably do is, from my perspective, and this is not the perspective of the committee that I was served on, but we should probably pay our first select person more, give them more time in office, let the people vote. I've had some discussions with a number of people not on the meeting tonight about the idea of an RTM and representation. And I go on to posit also that most people I talk to in our town don't even know who all the names of our board of selectmen. To water that down to have them be sort of regionally represented is not going to work. We get poor turnouts at town meetings as it is. I've had many discussions with Bruce Wilson about this, that people really don't come out unless they're upset about something. Bottom line is, we're not seeing that people are really upset about anything in the town. Could we tweak things a little bit to make things run smoother as technology and systems improve? Yes, but to make a sweeping change to take the vote away from the people, which in a sense really empowers one specific party and develops resentment. We have enough division in our country right now. And I think that would be a very big mistake. And I'm seeing, as I say, I'm looking on my second screen here, I've got half a dozen towns. I just did a quick search again before I got on this meeting, but I'm seeing in Enfield, there's a big petition to remove the position of town office. I'm seeing Duncan, Arizona. I mean, I'm just finding Gorham. Stratford is one that has moved away from the just in our backyard. I know that our committee was supposed to talk to them. Apparently nobody did. I came into the committee a little bit later in the game due to a departure of another member. So I don't know the cause why some of the towns weren't talked to. Certainly the virus had some impact.
Bob, I was wondering, and unfortunately, we're to move to our next agenda item at some time. But okay. I'm wondering if you have a list of no, don't go yet. I don't want to cut you off, please. It's public comment. But to the extent if you have you're sort of rattling off a list of towns, if there's any chance if you could email that to me or to Lauren, because at some point in time we will call in other towns. I would really appreciate that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I will. See, Joe.
Yeah.
I can do that. Like I said, I just did a very quick search. You can do it yourself. But in Connecticut, the ones that jump up are Enfield, Stratford. They're different sizes, but it's you're never going to find a perfect fit. You could either say, "Oh, this is great," or it's not. You could pick that apart all day long. But I think it's the challenges.
The right answer is there's no town like.
I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, please.
You're breaking up a little bit. Maybe me here. But there's no town exactly like Madison. That's for darn sure. That's why we live here. But I embrace constructive discourse. I think it's an important part of our process, our government system. We have an adversarial system both in our judicial and legislative and executive processes. So I think we need to have that. But I appreciate you need to get moving forward. But I would say that our committee, I would like to summarize it, that the ad hoc government study committee rejected the idea of a town manager, and it was very thoroughly looked at. And so I think you were a little bit misled by Bob's position at the prior meeting, because he was personally, he really believed in it. But the committee, after really looking at all the facts, did not find that to be really a good idea. It's too radical of a change. We're trying to fix something that may not really be all that broken. So I don't see anything that is that broken. So could we tweak some things? Yes, but I don't think this is the solution. So thank you for your time, Joe. I will.
No, thank you. Thank you for, please, thank you for coming and please come to all of them. You know, it's important to us. I will tell you that certainly the two gentlemen from the Government Studies Committee talked about the town manager. I think they were pretty clear. It was not the consensus of the committee, but I think that having your voice here is extremely helpful. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I remain available. I mean, a couple of you know where to find me. I remain available for questions. You know, I have done large-scale federal government restructuring in the past. I'm familiar with many of the processes and the checks and balances that need to go into place in doing so. So, you know, I remain available to you if you have any questions or any follow-up, you know, concerns or questions. I invite constructive discourse. So thank you for your time.
No, thank you for coming, and we appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you, Bob. Lauren, do we have any other members of the public that would like to speak?
No, but Bob O'Connor does have his hand raised.
Okay, I just had a quick question. Bob, did your committee, it seems to me that, well, okay, would you favor electing the superintendent of schools using the same logic?
No, because you would still, with the superintendent of schools, the chief of police, a variety of those types of positions, they are not elected positions. They are appointed, but they are appointed by a representative of elected official, if you will, in a committee that has oversight by the people.
So if I could, and I'm so sorry, Bob, both Bobs, but I am sensitive to the fact that both Ira and Peter won't be with us for too much longer. So, but I very much appreciate the conversation. And do we have any other members of the public, Lauren, or are we good with? I think our next agenda item is the minutes.
Yep.
So if that being said, does anyone have comments on the minutes, or can I get a motion and a second to approve?
I see Noreen saying she moved it.
Excellent. Can I see somebody else saying they second it? Good. I've got a Noreen and a Joan. All in favor of the minutes, adopting them? Excellent. We've got waves and nods. Perfect. Okay. So I think these next two meetings, we said we were going to spend more time on the document itself. And of course, we'll have public comment in both of them. Ira and Peter, you might remember for what seems like, 8 million years ago, but was only the beginning of our process. I think they came to our second meeting. Ira and I had a chance to talk yesterday, and they've been through the document. Lauren, I think they have some comments for you, but Ira, perhaps you want to lead us through some of your thoughts. And I know Mr. Hubbard's themes are some of the big themes that I'm sure you've heard on other charter review commissions. So how would you like to proceed, Ira?
Well, I'm sensitive to the time issue, not my time. I'm not committed to ending at 6 o'clock or any particular hour. So
we routinely go to midnight here at the Charter Review Commission. We're the hardest working Charter Review Commission in the state. Most people would agree that.
We're going to put that in the charter that there are no 12 o'clock midnight meetings. That's the first. Yeah, that's the first.
The zoners would be happy.
Yeah, I know. So I want to be efficient, and I did have a chance to speak to Joe yesterday, and I've spoken to him every few weeks, let's say, to try to get some update. I know kind of where you are, and some technical things are being changed. So I don't want to go all the way back. I mean, Pete and I have spent some time, each of us separately, and we've discussed together going through the charter, and we've just picked out a variety of things. It's actually, quite a few things ranging from, very, very small things, smallish things like, why do you mandate that the Board of Selectmen meets twice a month? I can't imagine why you would require that. Maybe they want to meet once a month. That's a small thing. And there's some things like that. Why 6 members to the Board of Finance? That's an even number. I think you ought to have an uneven number so you can vote and move on with your business. You know, that's a smallish kind of thing.
If I could, as a Board of Finance chair, I wholly endorse that idea, because
Yeah,
like
no, I'm
every
just
Board of
trying
Finance
to,
chair, periodically we deadlock.
I know Joe had asked me if I could outline some of the small things, but that was late yesterday, and unfortunately I outlined in writing and I didn't get a chance to do that. Uh, So, and I can go through those, but just to some sort of overview, I think the key questions that I saw are some were raised by Bob Hubbard that we just heard. And Joe, you've mentioned some of the things about town manager, et cetera, et cetera. So the bigger issues, it seems to me, are what to do about town manager versus first selectman. Neither Pete nor I have worked directly with a town manager form of government. Pete did some research. We can share it with you. There are 33, I was surprised, town manager type of government in Connecticut out of 169 towns, I guess. That's more than I thought. I haven't worked with them, and that does strike me, as Bob said, as a very radical kind of thing to do. If you think everything is broken and you want to kind of break it down and start from scratch, then maybe consider it. But it seems to me that perhaps more can be accomplished by uh, extending the term of the first selectman to 4 years. I feel strongly, I'll say, that that would be something that would be important for a town the size of Madison. Fairfield went to a 4-year first selectman term not too long ago. Fairfield's a much bigger town, I admit. Westport, which is somewhat comparable, slightly larger perhaps, went to 4 years, 30 years ago. It does give the first selectman a chance to come in. It probably takes any first selectman a good year to learn the basics. And then they're campaigning the second year, or they're starting to think about the election the second year. So for continuity and stability, I think that ought to be very high on your list. The second sort of major point is what to do with all the town meetings. It seems to me that the charter has a lot of town meetings, or at least a few. And many of the towns that I've either worked with or seen, if they've retained the town meeting, which you might want to, have limited it to an annual town budget meeting. I have one for Weston on Saturday and the next Saturday for Wilton. Why is it on Saturday? Has to do with COVID, but that's a different story. So, one as opposed to many. There's one that's we talked about briefly first time we appeared, I think, and there's one that's required 45 days after the beginning of the year. If you tell me that's very popular and you really want it, and it's fine with me. But
I wish I could tell you that any of our town meetings are very popular.
I've never seen it in January or February, I should say. So you can go. So those are some of the major structural kinds of things. How to set it up. What authority does the first selectman have? The term, the number of town meetings, and then you get to a lot of the small stuff, which which I can try to outline if you want. But Pete, do you want to add anything right now before or do you want us to keep going on? There's some discrepancies, for instance, in signing of petitions. At one point, it talks about 1,200. Another point talks about 500. Pete raised that with me a while ago. The quorum for the town meeting, 75. Is that a good number, bad number? Is it too high, too low? Another town we do work for hasn't had a quorum in like 5 out of the last 6 years. So maybe theirs is too high. So I can't really assess it, but that's something to think about. For instance, I mentioned about the Board of Finance.
Ira, I've got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
One issue for us is materiality of dollar amounts for expenditure. Is there, for the towns that you've seen, do you know where they set the dollar amount for when you're triggering a town meeting? is there any yardstick to use or comparative yardstick in terms of percentage of the budget, or is because that both that and the 75 number feel a little bit like dowsing rods, right? We're all walking around with crooked sticks trying to see what feels like the right number. And
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of
what's the
on those
number?
if there's a metric we could use.
Yeah, I've forgotten what is the current number now?
75 is ours.
Lauren,
75.
75 is the core. Oh, I thought you were asking a different question about the dollar amount.
The
Oh.
dollar amount's 50,000?
It's 50,000 in aggregate. So it's 50,000 throughout the fiscal year. So if that's 5 requests of 10,000, that last request is going to a town meeting
Automatically or by petition?
automatically.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something right there to think about, you know, so anything over 50,000 goes to a town meeting?
Anything in
aggregate.
if you
Aggregate.
spend totally over 50,000, you cannot exceed 50,000 outside of the budgetary line without triggering a town meeting. But the reality is then those expenditures tend to be small, and who's going to come out at 7 o'clock for a $2,500 expenditure,
Yeah,
you know, and
yeah.
sit around to, it's a question. So I didn't know if there was a way to assess. I think it was if I were to channel my inner Bruce Wilson, I'd say that it should be hard to spend town money. Hence, he personally takes sort of comfort in that low number because he feels there's an option to be accountable. But you know, I don't know that I have a principal distinction other than it doesn't seem right.
Yeah, I mean, the other side of it is that it just creates, I'll use the word burden, you know, for a lot of appropriations to go to a town meeting. And does that hamper the operation of the town in any material way? I don't know the answer. You know, again, it's a lot of town meetings potentially. You could raise it certainly, or you could make it more, you know, by petition, so it's not automatic. So if a group of people feel it's just the wrong thing, they can petition and call for a town meeting, but as opposed to having something that's automatic. So that's something else to think about.
And the alternative might be to, as opposed to having an aggregate, to having a lower number, but with an unlimited, in other words, any appropriation in excess of 10,000 or 5,000 or whatever the number is, but without an aggregate. You know, so you could have a bunch of smaller requests that wouldn't have to go to a town meeting, unless you're.
Is there a way to look at what do people do? It's like you guys have done a bunch of charters. What do they do?
Well, the petition option, I think, is out there, that if somebody feels it's inappropriate at some level, or a referendum option is, you see a lot of those where you have to get a certain number of signatures and you can make it less difficult or more difficult. The automatic nature of it seems to me to be, as towns get larger and more complicated, it strikes me as sort of inefficient. But I don't want to be accused of being anti-democratic or you know, or anything like that. If it works and people are happy, then fine. But that strikes me, Pete. What do you think? As this system?
Yeah, if you're going to retain, I'm sorry, if you're going to retain a town meeting form of government versus RTM or town council or some other legislative body, then yeah, I agree. I mean, it doesn't come up in a lot of towns. It's never an issue because of the nature of the legislative body and who meet monthly or twice a month or whatever it is. So appropriations end up being less of an issue because, you know, it's just part of the monthly agenda of those bodies. So that's another thing to think about. I mean, I don't know how, you know, how important the town meeting form is versus a representative town meeting or a town council or some other legislative body. But that's whenever you have a town meeting, you're going to end up with more town meetings, depending on how you put that threshold for appropriations. I mean, that's so.
But you could,
So let's go, Joan. I was going to say, Ira, let's go, Joan, then
Yeah.
Noreen.
So, couple of questions. First of all, as far as have you seen anyone, like base it on a percentage of the budget? Anything over a certain percent would then trigger a town meeting, or you could petition for a town meeting at that point.
I haven't.
Okay.
I don't know if I have not.
yeah, no, I think I've seen more dollar amounts, and then periodically the dollar gets changed perhaps as charters get updated.
Reviewed. Okay. And secondly, could you just give us a list of the appointed boards and commissions that are required to be in a charter per state statute, if there are any? And then you don't have to do it tonight. If that could be something that could be sent to the group, because we're going to be looking at that area
Yeah,
in
sure.
detail.
Obviously,
Excellent point.
some boards and commissions can be either appointed or elected, like planning and zoning.
Right.
No, I know, but the question is, do we need to have a zoning commission within our charter?
Right.
Or could
We
it
can
just
have a
be an
zoning commission.
ordinance?
What has to be? I mean, we probably want one because you wouldn't want to have people getting fancy ideas.
Well, yeah, I mean,
But-
a lot of them say there shall be a planning and zoning commission, with authority as set forth in the general statutes. Or sometimes you'll see the word, there shall be an appointed planning and zoning commission, or there shall be an elected, because they're both. And sometimes it will define the terms and things like that.
But if we do that in an ordinance rather than in the charter, can that be done? That was kind of my point. We're trying to, as Joe
would be the
likes to
bare
say, what
minimum?
has to be charterized versus what can be, say, in our ordinances, which created these
Yeah.
to begin with.
Well, it strikes me, though, using the planning and zoning example, that goes to the heart of your governmental structure. Is it elected or appointed? So it strikes me as entirely appropriate. I don't know if it's absolutely necessary, but entirely appropriate to put in a charter. Put in the charter. You want to define your governmental structure. It's the Bible of your government, and so whether it's elected, appointed, how many members.
But then once you want to establish another commission or committee, do you have to then change the charter? So for instance, we have a coastal resiliency committee that was created by ordinance. Should that then be added to the charter on the next review? We have a landscape committee that's in the charter that hasn't met since the people that were on it, so there's the process of evolving committees and commissions.
You don't have
to kind of.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
That we'd like to make sure isn't, going against a charter versus, and like sometimes it says there's X number of people, and now all of a sudden we've expanded that committee. We're actually going against our own charter by expanding the committee.
Yeah, if I could boxcar right after Joan's comment, the conversation I think she's reflecting is there are committees and there are committees.
Yeah.
So which are the ones that are the committees that really should be in our charter, so we could, if we wanted to bare bones it, and leave the rest up for flexibility, not so much as a legal requirement, but like the zoners, ZBA, inland wetlands. What are the ones that really should be there, and what are the ones that the selectmen can deal with the structure? And then after this answer, Noreen's next.
Yeah, well, that we can tell you, and
That would be
that's
helpful.
that's what I was going to try to articulate. That the main ones, the most important ones, I think should be listed, size, etc., elected, appointed, and kind of like the permanent standing type committees, boards, and then you give either the selectmen or some probably selectmen authority to appoint other committees as necessary.
Yeah, we've got a lot of permanent standing. That's the thing. We've got a lot.
Yeah, well, the Westport Charter, there has a page where they're just all listed.
Okay.
Go ahead, Noreen.
Yes, I've got a couple questions, but I just wanted to remark about what Joan brought up, I was thinking of the police commission. And I don't think a town has to have a police commission, especially obviously not every town has a police department. They might use state troopers, but I think the state is pretty clear on if you do have a police commission, well, there's certain things you have to do. And by state law, but you're not required to have a police commission. I'm almost sure, unless that's changed.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's a pretty important one. But anyway, couple things you brought up. And Peter, it's nice to meet you. And Ira, I don't know if you remember me. I was on the board when we brought you and Floyd in, and you've done a great job for us. So thank you.
I do. Yes. Thank you.
One of the things you brought up was the 4-year terms for the selectmen. And how does it work with the rest of the selectmen? Is it all right now what we have with the board of selectmen only? None of the other boards are like this. All 5 get off and on at the same time. And so do you see that if the selectmen have 4-year terms, are they all together, or are they, they rotate for some continuity? Could you get us some information on that, on how that works?
Yeah, I mean, we could tell you just based on the, half a dozen or so that we work with regularly and represent. I mean, if you wanted us to do more research,
No, I was just curious. I was just curious, Ira, if you.
I think it varies on the size. In Westport and New Canaan, there are 3-person boards of selectmen. And in Westport, the first selectman and the second select person run as a team, and they get elected as a team. That's not always the case in other towns. And then the third select person is the losing first selectman candidate. So they're on the same 4-year cycle.
So they are.
I'm sorry.
I didn't
Just
know that.
That's one example. In New Canaan, just in New Canaan, I'm just out of memory. New Canaan has 3 people also. They run separate. They run separately, so they're not. It's not a team, first and second, and sort of like the top people win. 3 out of the top 4 kind of thing. So, but they're on the same. They are on the same cycle.
Yeah, on the same cycle.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I.
Now, I think Wilton, which has 5 people, they are on a different cycle. I'm fairly sure.
Guilford used to have 3, and actually was working with us. They came to us because they were having problems with quorums. And like if someone who was in meeting with the first selectman, one of the other selectmen came into town hall and would have liked to join the meeting, they couldn't walk in. And so that was one of the reasons they went to 5. Just the whole idea.
Wilton has 5. They have certain legislative functions assigned to the 5-person board of selectmen, and they have certain authority to make appropriations. They have preserved their town meeting, but it's largely limited to the annual town meeting, which I referred to earlier, which is going to be on Saturday, the 24th or the 30th. So there is a petition mechanism, but it's not so easy. So that may be something to take a look at to see if that is some compromise. They still have a first select woman, and it works pretty well.
Ira, that was actually my second question. If they have this one town meeting, what if something comes up like the state has to cut back on some funding and decides to cut them by $1 million in the middle of the year? They call a meeting for that. Wouldn't they call a meeting to take action on what to do? I mean, this one time per year, are there exceptions?
Yeah, no, though there's a petitioning process to have additional town meetings, but they don't occur too often.
So they, as they do these special appropriation or line item transfers, the 2 boards, just 3 boards.
The boards generally do it, yeah.
Okay.
And I believe there's a petition process still, but you don't see it utilized too often. So It's some compromise. It keeps the town meeting. It vests a lot of authority in a 5-person board of selectmen. There still is a first select woman who has certain, CEO type authority.
Mhm.
I think it's a comparable sized town also. It works pretty well, I think.
And my final question is something you haven't brought up, but for several years now, and I'm going back to that I remember like 07, 08, we started talking about some sort of town administrator, like a, sort of a, you'd have the board of selectmen. This is not a town manager, but this would be the continuity, and it would be the person really involved with overall. We've tried pieces of it. We at one point had a tax collector who became oversaw assessors, town clerk, register of voters, which actually wasn't. It's really that's under the state, but so they had pieces of it. But we had ideas to do this, and somehow or other, none of us know how this happened. The referee, it's referred to in the budget, in the charter, but where you're told to look is not in the charter anymore. Do you have any towns that have a position like that? It's really like a chief administrator, officer.
Like a chief operating officer almost.
Yeah.
Exactly,
yes.
Joe. Thank you. Yes.
Yes. It's different than a town manager form of government, which doesn't have basically a first selectman or a mayor. But there are towns. New Canaan has a town administrator, and he just retired a few months ago, but he had been there for 10, 11 years. So that offered a lot of continuity, and he handled, a lot of administrative tasks, but he's not a town manager. He didn't run the town, but he handled a lot of important tasks and offered a lot of assistance to the first selectman, whatever, preparing boards, accumulating data, FOIA, he handled all that stuff. And it provided some continuity from first selectman to first selectman.
Was his position in the charter, Ira?
Yes, I think so. I think it was in the charter. Pretty sure.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
And what was his title again?
Either administrative official or some variation of town administrator. I think administrative officer maybe was something like that. But a town administrator.
Okay.
Weston, which is smaller, has a first selectman and a town administrator, and similarly, he does a lot. And since it's a smaller town, he probably does more than the New Canaan guy because they don't have a large population and it's just a smaller town. So he's a permanent fixture.
Okay.
Also,
thank
fairly
you.
certain.
Thank you both.
Okay, so we have Dave, then Bob. So go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, thanks. Just one quick question. You mentioned, a few towns, the losing first selectman is then on the board, and based on the number of votes that happens in Madison. Is that common, for most of the towns, or is that something that's, that's fairly uncommon, or does that happen all the time?
Again, this is based on our handful of towns and then, over the years going to other towns for different projects, et cetera. It seems fairly common. The loser goes on in New Canaan as the third person in Westport. Wilton's a little different because they have 5. So it's not the case in Weston. It's not unheard of. I don't know, Pete, do you have any sense as to a broader sampling?
Well, some other towns, like Trumbull, where I live, the loser is out, has no role on the board.
The unsuccessful candidate. Let's go with it that way.
Well, in Trumbull, I would
no pejoratives here in the charter.
I use the word loser for the Trumbull, but no, I'm just kidding. So I think there are a fair number of towns where the unsuccessful candidate for first selectman has no role. So, but it's that. They're both out there. They're both out there.
Bob O'Connor?
Yeah, this is a legal question. The current charter has a statement in there in one of the headings of a section that says the legislative body is the town meeting. And I just have assumed that does that have any reason that's there legally? Because clearly it's not true. It's misleading. The legislative body is the Board of Selectmen. I mean, they draw up legislation and discuss it and ordinances, all of that. Certainly the town meeting doesn't do that. So is there any reason that's there, or is this some kind of nostalgia thing from 1840?
I think it's called that for purposes, the statutes require a legislative body, and legislative includes budget. It's not just adopting ordinances or passing laws, it's also adopting a budget as part of the legislative process. So I have the charter, but I'm not looking at that provision, but I think it says it's the legislative body, but the Board of Selectmen has certain legislative duties as well. So it's
right.
But it's the legislative body for purposes of identifying really the budget authority in the town, because that's where that term is found in state statutes a lot.
So
I think that's
constrained that we have to have that somewhere.
I'm sorry?
Do we have to identify a single legislative body in the charter by state law?
Well, the statutes do that. So they use the word legislative body in certain places. So it's helpful to identify what body that is. And but again,
I mean, I think that's the right answer. I think you should, I don't know if you must, but I just don't know, but all charters I've seen designate a legislative body, but some of them, as in Madison and Wilton, I think is the same. They give, they say elsewhere that, in all legislative actions shall be, determined by the town meeting, except for those, except others, which shall be, done by the Board of Selectmen. Or sometimes they say the Board of Selectmen shall have legislative powers as follows, but they still designate one as the legislative body, and I suspect, without researching it, that's important to do.
So Ira, looking at 7148BB, which I know you have memorized, it's at least this is one place to, my cheesy Google search brought up. As used in the section, legislative body means the council, commission, board, body, or town meeting, by whatever name it may be known, having or exercising the general legislative powers and functions of a municipality, and municipality may mean any town. And I think that's the point, Bob, I don't want to speak for you, but I think that's the point that where we periodically hang on, because, what does it mean when it says by whatever name it may be known, having or exercising the general legislative power? So is it the case that under our structure, it's the town meeting that exercises the general legislative power? I assume since it's the budget and our adoption of the charter,
it's a ratification
that's the
power,
group that
clearly.
does it.
Isn't there a power, though, to appeal certain legislative actions done by the selectmen, or am I confusing that with a different charter?
So each of the legislative actions that the Board of Selectmen take on have to be approved by a town meeting. So any ordinance that's put in place, I believe, the budget. And so then I think to myself, if that's the case, do we even need a referendum? Can we have a town meeting for the budget? So I think we've gone to the nth degree to get as many people as possible involved in government. But you can, Noreen, let's face it, we can only lead the horse to water. We can't make them drink, so to speak. And we've literally, that first town meeting that we always have at the beginning of the year, we've honestly had bets among the Board of Selectmen, how many outside public are coming that don't have to be here, that's not a department head, that's not, who live in that, right?
You're so
Right?
true. You're so right. That's so true.
Right.
You know,
So maybe,
one
if
of
we-
the, good.
yeah, maybe if we reduce the numbers of town meeting, but make certain ones impactful, then we might get some turnout, is my thought.
Go to
Yeah,
a
one
representative
of-
town meeting.
I was trying to suggest that, but that was a
RTM.
more articulate way of saying it, that if the people know that, at the end of the year, that's the time they come, and that becomes kind of the habit for the budget vote in May or so, maybe that'll make some difference.
Okay,
You know
go
what?
ahead, Noreen.
Can I just back to what Bob O'Connor said? When as far as the legislative body not really being the town meeting, but our board of selectmen is not the budget authority of the town. Our board of finances. So right away there's a discrepancy with what board does what, and so I think that's been part of the problem with leaving it at the town meeting form of government. And Joan's right. I mean, I can remember, I'm 40-something years here, the only meetings that would be crowded was the Board of Ed budget, first presentation, and it was all parents. We were all over there, with our certain things that we didn't want to see cut. And interesting enough, Joan, I think, or somebody mentioned just doing it by town meeting and not going to referendum, because there's a cost to referendum. But Madison over the years has done some significant things without a referendum. I don't believe we had a referendum when we bought Garvin Point. I don't believe we had we went to town meeting. I don't think we went to referendum when we bought our town, the Hammonasset campus. I think it was determined, there was enough support and people got up and spoke. And we can go back and look, but I think
I think that one was a referendum, if I recall. Noreen.
Oh, it was, okay.
Yeah.
But in the charter, and I'm not sure, Joe, you might know, are we required to go to referendum? Referendum follows a town meeting. Is there a point where you can say we're going to do this town meeting and stop here? Or has something changed in the budget, the charter, that we're required to have a referendum? I'm just not sure.
Without it in front of me, Lauren, correcting me? Yeah, I believe the purchase and disposition of purchase of land.
Because it's referendums are costly. I think they're like $20,000 or something. I've been a while, Joe, but isn't that kind of like where it is? $15,000 to $20,000 to run a referendum.
Yeah, it was about 8 to 9 about X number of years ago. So I would imagine you're in the 15 range. Yeah.
Well, that's why number one, the referendum machine vote, I think you're talking about, right? I'd be careful about, you didn't say to eliminate, but with a quorum of 75 or 50 or 100, you can have a small group of people that can, make
right
dramatic decisions for the entire town. So I think it's an important option, if it is an option. It is in a lot of towns. Someone makes a motion that they go to, a machine vote or a referendum. It's called different things, and then everybody has a chance to vote. And so then you have a, true community opinion, more or less. So I'd be careful of that. You can also, again, consistent with the notion of not having too many town meetings, because then people don't care. You're going to wear people out, even for disposition of property, maybe a dollar amount. If the property is less than X, it still has to go through a P&Z approval, but then the selectmen can approve that, perhaps. Maybe you're just selling some small easement or something.
I think Lauren gave the example of desks and old computers, right? That trigger the apparatus of government to get rid of stuff that otherwise should hit the dumpster. So if I could ask just a couple of targeted things. So first, to the extent you have things you've seen or specific suggestions, if you guys could write them up and give them to Lauren, and we can compare them to the sheet that we're working from. And that way we can make sure, sort of on a process basis, that we've got full capture. The second thing I was going to ask is that question about enabling and we'll figure out what to call it, the town administrator, the chief operating officer. I would like clarity on that issue to know if the charter needs to enable it, because Noreen is quite correct. However, while the history of it remains in the vagaries of time, the reality is, I think that we'd like for this group to understand, do we want to make it clear that a first selectman can appoint a COO or not? So I would welcome an analysis of saying, is there a problem with it in our current charter? And even a suggestion as to language to adopt, to say, if we wanted to do that, what would it look like? And then the next question I've got is, as we go to the town manager, it strikes me, and please, commission chime in, but it strikes me the decision is sort of, tripartite. Should the charter say, no, thou shalt not have that, or just not enable it? Should the charter enable it upon some apparatus so that it's up to the town if they wanted to hold a referendum on it at some point in time? Is the charter in the way? Or should the charter recommend it? Right? Those strike me as the three things to do. And I don't know what the language would look like. So for instance, if we wanted to put a provision into the charter fixing, I think, some of the errant Brigadoon-like sections that disappeared and didn't reemerge, what would we say? So if we wanted to make it so that if the town chose that they wanted a town manager, but the charter's not in the way, that they could. So what would that enabling language look like?
So
And
can I
that's one of
just
the questions I had.
clarify
Go ahead.
one thing? I think you're meaning
Please.
town administrator, not town manager, because town manager is a form of government.
So I am meaning town manager in terms of the change over town manager form of government. So the question is, how would we enact it? So we could, if we wanted to, posit it as a change to the charter now, or we could enable it subject to some future town meeting and referendum, right? So the charter is no longer in the way. But I just don't know what those would look like.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you do the second one. Because
Oh,
again,
good. That makes two of us. That's spectacular.
I mean, first of all, you're going to make recommendations, and then it's going to go to the selectmen, and then if they vote on it, it goes to the public for a vote. A series of questions. So
Thank you.
It seems to me that if you decide the town manager form of government, as Clinton did recently, is the way to go, that would be your recommendation, and that's going to generate probably extensive discussion, as it should.
Hope so.
And the selectmen will then vote yes or no. They could decide not to submit it to the citizens for a vote. But I mean, to put it in as some option to be considered for the future without further charter changes, I don't know. That strikes me as, I've never seen that, and it strikes me as confusing. Again, you have to have a valid question that I guess would allow it, and to word that in a way that people understand what you're doing. To provide a charter section that will allow change to a town manager government at some point in the future upon certain conditions. That's a tough question to vote yes or no on.
I would be confused on that personally. I mean, if the charter is the organic law and defines the government, all of a sudden to have something in the charter says, but you can try Plan B if you'd like. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
don't think it works.
I guess the way it could sound is to say, upon give your mechanic and the approval of the selectmen, the town could hold a referendum for, and you could adopt a town manager. So
Yeah, I still think that's very confusing, though, to me. Because if you hold a referendum, then don't you then have to change votes? You have to have the structure within the charter that defines what it is. And it's either in there or not in there. Correct me if I'm wrong, lawyers in the room.
Yeah, I think they're different charters too. I mean, appointments and administrative responsibilities. I mean, they're sort of different animals. So I don't know how you.
That's a good point. So I guess then sticking then to the second option to say that should this group want to recommend a town manager, what's the roadmap look like for that? I mean, if we wanted to do that or advance it to the Board of Selectmen, what would it look like? Like, what are all the things that would have to get changed? How do you do that?
But you can still maintain your board of selectmen.
Yeah.
You only have one CEO, so that's either the first selectman or the town manager. So
But they have a different diminished role.
Right.
they could have the first selectman could have sort of a ceremonial role in the town, but the town manager, because in statutes, generally speaking, first selectmen are ex officio members of a lot of the boards and commissions. They don't have the vote. They can't vote, but they can attend and sit in if they want. But you really have to kind of choose that. You could retain certainly your board of selectmen and give it legislative powers, and as it has now, some of the legislative powers it has. But you wouldn't have a first selectman with any authority in that event.
So I guess that's you're pushing on the question. If we're going to have a discussion, as I think we have to, because that's really what most people want to talk about, on should this charter install a town manager, because it sounds like the idea of installing subject to other stuff isn't workable, then what are all the considerations we'd have? I mean, so we have our first selectman, we have our board of selectmen.
Well,
Are there, are we messing around with the Board of Finance? Are we, how do we think about the scope of the question, or at least the scope of our decision?
I think, truthfully, I have not dealt with a charter that has a town manager, truly not a town administrator, but a true town manager form of government. So I don't know enough about it to just talk about it tonight. I think what you'd have to do is start accumulating and reviewing the charters of town manager towns. Start with Clinton right now, I guess, and see how that comes together. I mean, it can be done. Somebody would have to do the necessary research to see what changes, are most common for other boards and agencies, Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, ceremonial first selectman or not.
So that would be a proposal of an entire new charter. Correct me if I'm wrong. And hold on, let me finish the thought. And if it goes down, we're still with the charter that's full of holes and errors, correct?
No, because
no, I mean, because you do have to create a charter that supports a town manager form of government. And you can't say, can you have this charter or do you want that charter? I thought that was a no, but if that's a yes, then okay, that's one way to do it.
I think I got to think about that, but we were asked about these alternate questions and we advised against that.
Yeah, but then how do you propose? Yeah, actually, I was too quick to say, no, Joan, you could, but no, you're right. Because then how do we do it? Because we want to fix all the stuff, right? It to my mind personally, it's going to make sense even if we went out to a town manager, there will be someone with different powers called a first selectman, and maybe that person shouldn't be on a 2-year cycle, whatever powers they have. So there's a whole bunch of things we want to do. And should this commission want to advance a town manager, how do we not have, well, frankly,
I mean, have you done the research to see how it works and how successful? And I remember, I haven't. I mean, I heard Bob earlier say some towns are getting out of the town manager. I mean, he says it, I'm sure that's true, but I haven't done any.
No, we're still our next.
Research, is this just a theoretical question, or is this a serious effort to change the basic structure of the town government in Madison?
So I just have to ask one question, just to back up for a second. Yeah, is in the role of a town manager, not the form of government, but the role. What would be the difference between an administrator and a town manager? And so the context of where I'm coming from is, could we solve our problems with just the administrator?
So
well, I don't know exactly what the problems are, but I think you probably can. I've worked with the town for several years now. mostly on the land use side. I mean, I have a little perspective on it, but I don't know what problems you've heard from, you've had a lot of meetings, public hearings, you've met with others. I don't know what the problem is. If everyone is saying to you, you know, we can't deal with this first selectman form of government, okay, I get that. But if they're not saying that and it's just inefficiency or too much politics or too much transition,
Continuity is, I think, the
Continuity,
of those
then-
of it's not universal, but of those who are advancing it,
yeah,
the concern is continuity for long-term problems. Coastal towns, we have longer
yeah.
capital planning issues and other items.
I
So-
think the big
I-
issues we've come up with is continuity, and that has been more heavily from staff who deal with it every day.
Yeah.
And the other thing has been the lack of the people showing up for town meetings. Those are really the two big issues.
Well,
As you know, Ira,
I'm
we have a
gonna-
very, very well-run town. We're pretty fortunate.
Yeah, no, I always thought so. In the first selectmen that I've met, the last 3 or 4, you know, have all been good. So I would say focus on, I mean, I'm sticking my neck out here a little bit, but I would say 4-year term, town administrator, and fewer town meetings. Things to think about. And to answer the question though, the town administrator, as I've seen it, is not the CEO for the town. It's a person who is designated in the charter with you know, I mean, we can pull out the language, but someone who will assist in the, you know, assist the first selectman or maybe assist the board of selectmen in you know, the operations of the town, and will handle certain administrative assignments, tasks as assigned. So the person is not in charge, doesn't make policy decisions, doesn't make personnel decisions, but just gets a lot of stuff done. It's really you know, somebody who can efficiently help the first selectman and the board of selectmen and help department heads. That's the way I've seen it work. You want something done, you know, can I get this information? Can I get this background report? Or whatever. You can come up with countless examples. They call the town administrator.
So if I could, I'm going to hop one thing, then Joan, then Bob. But to answer Matt's question, the town administrator would still be taking direction from the change of first selectman, as opposed to the town manager, who is on par or outlives them.
I think
so
that's correct. Yeah.
Joan, then Bob.
In your experience, do the department heads report to the town administrator, or do they still report to the first select person?
To the first selectman. First select person. Yeah.
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, my understanding from the literature is that it's the chief administrator is more like a chief operating officer, and it's a question of where a city manager, what they have in common is both jobs are supposed to be professional, nonpartisan, implementing policies set by the board of supervisors or selectmen or whatever. The difference is that the manager has more power more administrative discretion to move ahead and administer, including things like appointing the chief of police. Where I'm coming from is I live next to a town, State College, Pennsylvania, which is a classic city manager system or borough manager, where that was the job of the city manager. The board set policies. Now, the administrator, my understanding is that a number of those powers that the manager have would remain with the chief select person, or what I hate that word, by the way. We have to find something new, supervisor. Anyway, that's a whole other issue. But yeah, so it's kind of a chief administrator is city manager light, where explicitly more powers of being the CEO remain with the head of government, currently our select woman. Is that
That's
accurate or
correct.
fair?
Yeah, no,
Ira?
I think that is
Fair?
correct. Yeah, the town administrator doesn't set policy, in my observation, but handles certain tasks, important tasks. In Westport, for instance, they call the person the operations director, because that's been built into the Westport charter for, many years. And it hadn't been filled in a long time, but the current first selectman got it filled. There's money involved too. You got to pay for a new person working at town hall. And he got that, and he hired an operations director, and she kind of, it's not quite the same as the town administrator, but she handles some critical tasks as assigned to her. And she does work with department heads. She will provide some continuity, presumably, because the first selectman's not running again. So is it a town manager light? Or it's really not quite the same. But it would offer the assistance, and it does provide some continuity, because then that town administrator can say to the next first selectman, this is the way we've done it. And,
Ira, to that point, so in the charter, we could empower a town administrator. Do we have latitude in that, in how we want to define that? Or a town manager light, like you said?
yeah, I would think so. Yeah, I haven't, again, I haven't done research to see how it's worded in one charter versus another. You don't want to tie the hands too much, because, one first selectman might want to use the person more or less. So probably have to be a little careful, but it's another staff member, an important staff member. It's not a secretary, and it's not a town manager. It's something certainly closer to a town manager.
So let's go Noreen, then Pete.
Actually, Bob Gordon asked my question. It sounds like we can create the role of this operations director for what we want, or as the Board of Selectmen wants. And there was one of the questions back years ago when we were looking at creating this position, was whether or not the person would report to the Board of Selectmen or the first selectman. And we never, got that ironed out. But I remember that being, I remember discussing it with the head of the Board of Finance, who was Fillmore McPherson at the time. And we never came up with an answer on that. And I don't know, Ira and Peter, if you see that, is it always to the first selectman, or is it to the board as a whole? And the only other thing that you said that surprised me is, if we create this position, I'm sort of surprised that the department heads don't report to this person, or maybe we could do it that way. I would just think that would make sense anyway. But my whole question was whether or not who this person would report to, and do we have leeway, and do you know what other towns are doing?
Yeah. Again, I'm telling you, this is based on a small sampling. It's possible that other towns have a town administrator who has direct reports. That's possible. I haven't researched that enough. I think whatever you do, you have to do that research. You have to see how it operates elsewhere, what these charter provisions say, accumulate some charters dealing from towns that have town administrators, see how it operates. I could be wrong. In other towns, maybe they do report to the town administrator. I don't think that's the case in a town such as New Canaan, for instance. I'm quite sure it's not the case, but it could be in other cases. And I think you have discretion to define that kind of thing the way you want.
Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, this is a little bit off topic. It has to do with town managers. The commission should know that there is another way statutorily to go to a town manager form of government without a charter revision. And that is it's in 7-98 it starts of the general statute. Title 7 is the municipal title for the, for municipal laws. But basically, in any town where there's a board of finance, provided that there's been a town meeting that has authorized it in advance, a board of finance can recommend to the Board of Selectmen the appointment of a town manager. And there's an obligation that the form of government stays that way for a minimum of 3 years. But it's an alternative way to create a town manager form of government, even if it's not in the charter.
And where is this? This is 7 what?
7-98 it starts.
Huh. No kidding.
But it's there. But my own view is that it's a very significant, I was almost going to say radical departure from what Madison and many other towns are doing. I'd be curious to know someday what the dialogue was like in Clinton, which is the most recent town to do it. But it's a serious step in the notion of having a town meeting, for 3 hours and make that decision and then send it to the Board of Finance. To me, that's almost irresponsible.
Yeah, I'm not recommending it. I'm just
No. You're just giving the facts, but I'm just saying that
the commission that avenue exists.
it's a big change to change your
amazing.
government like that.
Well, I always said that from the standpoint of the Board of Finance, you could raise a lot of ruckus. I didn't realize the ruckus level was quite that high. Boy, this is just tragic. I didn't know that. Well, in some respects, from the standpoint of our commission, then that does simplify things. Like, one of the concerns is, are we, because the charter only gets, reviewed every so often, are we then locking the town in? And the fact that there's a little escape valve which is, I think, under any stretch of the imagination, an extreme move. I can't help but notice, by the way they're using it in 7-98. If you look at the town manager, way they're talking about roads.
Yeah, bridge building. Yeah.
Bridge building. It almost looks like what they really are referring to, I'd be curious, is appointing a head combination finance and town engineer. I mean, this doesn't look at all like the full scope of running a complex town. And that would probably make sense. It almost looks like what this is taking over the functions of the Board of Finance. So if the Board of Finance, if our finance director is Stacy, if Stacy stopped replying to the Board of Finance, this looks like the Board of Finance can appoint someone in her place. I'm not 100% sure.
Well, it's a more complicated.
Really, the Board of Finance, the director of finance reports to the first selectman.
Right. But this thing, and for some reason I'm unable to copy it into the chat. But it's somewhat surprising. So I don't know that it means what we think it means in our context.
Joe, can I just add too, when Peter first brought it up, and the Board of Finance would make this recommendation, it almost seemed like they're telling the Board of Selectmen, you're not doing your job. We're going to recommend we bring somebody else in. That's my first reaction to a Board of Finance saying that to a Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, this isn't recommending. This is removing.
Oh, okay. I thought it was recommending. Okay. Well,
it's a radical approach to change your government. Yeah.
You shouldn't have brought it up. That's what
No, what do you mean? This is exciting. I put the link in it to the in the chat, the actual section. But Noreen, I think
Peter, believe me, you've made Joe's day. He loves stuff like this. Thank you for this little oddball part of the state and statute. He must be in his glory right now.
I love section 7148C that also lets us control fireplaces and smokestacks, which is,
Yes.
I think, an important function of town. I think it should be Lauren's job. Keeping an eye on the time, because I recognize now we're into the fun stuff, but I might be the only one having fun. So I think then at least what I'm hearing from the commission, and please speak up, is, that first part, please give us your suggestions so we can cross-check them with what we refer to affectionately as the Lauren list, and make sure we're not missing anything. And then B, I think really pursuing this point on the chief operating officer, if you would give thought to enabling language for that, or whatever we want to call it, town administrator, as to what that would look like. So if we had language, then we could then discuss it and look at the scope of the position. And I'm so sorry, I can't remember whether it was Joan or Noreen saying, who reports to it.
Could I make a suggestion that we might start from the last charter, since we did put it in there as a chief operating officer? There was a section that allowed for a chief operating officer and then redefined. It was chief operating officer and chief executive officer, that the first selectman, and it culled out responsibilities.
Chief administrative officer, I think.
No, we called it chief operating officer in the one that we ended up going to.
Yeah, I think that's the distinction between the charter you're looking at and the recommendation from the last commission. Okay. Lauren, would it be possible to give Ira that language to take a look over, although maybe Ira, you saw it before?
Well,
I can resend you the 2015.
Yeah, you're going to have to, maybe we can do it tomorrow, but you're going to have to tell me what our assignments are. And I wasn't sure if you're talking to Lauren or you're talking to Pete and me.
So I think, to the extent you've done the review, as we talked about, if you could, either write up or highlight the sections of the charter for the things you'd like to see. I'd like to make sure that since you've read it and Lauren and the staff have read it, that when this commission reviews it, we're reviewing one thing with everybody's questions.
Yeah, no, we can list the laundry list, I'll call it, of sections which either
perfect
we think need some addressing or at least some discussion. Like the quorum, maybe 75 is the right number. I don't really know, but that would be one example of have you discussed it? Weston, for instance, has a higher quorum. I think it's around 125 or 130. They have not had a quorum at their town meetings for 5 out of the last 6 years. So
I hate to be like, wow, they had one 6 years ago. That sounds great. So if you could also then, so Lauren will send you the 2015 language that Joan was referencing, the last charter proposal that didn't get adopted. And if you could perhaps look at that, and the errant chief administrative officer, which is the section I think that you're referring to, the language that goes nowhere. I think it'd be wonderful if we could get your thoughts on either the language that was proposed last time, or if there's any other town's language, so that this commission could have a thing to look at. Okay. So if the 2015 works, we'll just go with that. If you have any additional thoughts, and to the extent you want to include some of your editorializing as you're going through it, like 75, I don't know, but Wilton's 150, that also would be helpful. That way we could capture that. Because I think our next couple of tasks is just to go ding, ding, ding through our review.
And Joe, may I just add one thing? They brought the size of how many members of the Board of Finance. We should definitely get some more information.
Yeah, well, that'll be in my laundry list of things to take a look at. So the focus, just so I'm understanding, is kind of understanding the town administrator in your proposal that was, I guess, rejected, but in other charters, perhaps, that kind of thing.
Right. How would we enable that function? Were we going about it the best way in 2015, or now that you're looking, it from other towns, should we be thinking about it differently if we wanted to do that? Because I think there's I'm sensing interest in doing this. It'd be nice if we had language to look at.
Okay, that sounds good.
Or reviewed language. Go ahead, Joan.
And real question. Do you have a reference? Is there a place that we can look to see the salaries of other first selectmen? Because there's line item budgets, but it's salaries of it's
Yeah,
an
yeah.
office.
A lot of the towns seem to accumulate that. I've seen over the years, whenever they're having their own discussion about it. I've seen, lists, here's from Fairfield County and et cetera.
Right.
Where do they get that? I think maybe CCM has it.
Yeah, I think, Joan, I think Deb might actually have that because we just did that COLA for the current first selectman
Oh, okay, cool. All right,
position.
so let's,
So we may already have that, and I'll ask her, and if not, I will go to CCM and get it.
Yeah, Lauren, if I recall correctly, Stacy, I don't know where Stacy got it. When we did that in the Board of Finance, we
Yeah.
made that big move. We had neighboring and comparative towns. I want to say she got it from CCM.
Yeah, that was from CCM, and I believe we got a revised list just within the last couple of months from CCM.
Yeah,
I've never seen salaries in a charter.
right. No, it's just a thought process that I'm kind of going through.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, because it was somewhat controversial to raise the salary last time, and it is no small joy to me that in some of our conversations we've had in meetings thus far in this commission, people say, "Well, it's really good. We raised the salary a few years ago." So,
and don't forget, Pete and I always seem to be dealing with this, but it's in the state constitution that for a 4-year term for an elected official, you really have to raise it before the election in simple terms.
Right.
And then you can only give one increase for a 4-year term after 2 years have expired.
May I just add one thing too? Madison, most of our neighbors around us also give a stipend or something to the rest of the Board of Selectmen. And Madison used to, and a study was done, I see Joan clapping, a study was done by a Board of Finance member and years ago, and nobody ever saw the report. We don't, but I do know Madison's selectmen, the other 4 get nothing. Back in the 90s, we were getting, I think, $3,500, but Guilford each selectman gets $15,000 a year. Durham selectmen get several thousand. I don't know about Clinton now with town manager, but I think I know it's not in the charter, but as a group, we should really be discussing that because I think we brought it up one other time. It is something I think would make more people want to run. You have to go to everything. You're invited to every charity event in town. And you're buying tickets for everything.
Yeah.
When I went to look for the report, and I thought Al Goldberg was working on it with this other person, he goes, "No, I kept asking. I never saw the report either. So no one ever saw this report, but we changed what we were doing based on it." This is years ago. So that's another thing that I hope as selectmen or the Board of Finance would take a look at.
Noreen, we're compensated with the joy of service to our town, as we all are here in the Charter Review Commission.
I think you can put in that, the first selectman shall be compensated, and describe how it happens. The Board of Finance will make a recommendation. That's in a lot of charters. I think you probably can say the second and third select people shall also receive a compensation as set forth, so it's in there that they'll get paid. And maybe it may be $1,000 a year, but they'll get something.
That's right. You're right.
Ira, if I could, one other thing that probably the other super big part of our conversation is something we haven't mentioned. We talked about it when you were
I'm
first.
Listening, I just have to get a plug or I'm losing my power.
Oh, spend my life that way. So what it is? No, wait.
No, I'm listening.
I'm gonna have to leave in about 10 minutes or so.
Yeah, we'll move along, Bob. But the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen division is actually probably the single biggest item we've talked about. So I don't think there's anything to talk about here other than to the extent that if you could review the powers of the Board of Finance as vis-a-vis how they overlap on the Board of Selectmen, that's something where I think that we would really benefit for a review of the other charters that you work on, because both boards have talked about imprecision between their roles. And I think I think it was Matt who phrased it in this line of, we're functioning I'm trying to remember what you said. It was like we're functioning based on tradition almost, So to the extent that those roles, if you could look at them with respect to other charters and see if there's imprecision or frankly just good ideas in other towns, we would more than happily consider stealing them. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, learning from, adapting, a lot of fun. So that being said, any other questions from the board? Otherwise, I also promised Ira that we'd only keep him for an hour, and clearly I've lied. So I don't want to continue to
No
impose
problem.
too much on your time.
It's Joe McDougal time.
Exactly. It's a very
Just
imprecise.
thank you, Ira and Pete, for talking with us again.
Pleasure, my pleasure.
Excellent. So
Thank you.
No,
Thank you.
yeah, if you could just get that information and let me know when it goes over to Lauren, then that'll be
yeah,
and we'll
work on it. It may take just a little bit of time.
Well, if possible, if you could have some of it to her this week, we will meet again on this topic next week.
I thought we're doing every 2 weeks now.
I think we're meeting next week, and then we're going to review it. Am I right, Lauren? I think next week's our last of the week on weeks.
Yeah, it was next week, and then we would talk about potential subcommittees and also just the schedule going forward.
Yeah, I want to be honest. It's going to be very difficult to do it that quickly for me. If I can get some help from Pete or other people in the office, I'll try to expedite it. But I just have to tell you honestly, I just have a lot of my schedule's really booked up. But I'll do my best.
Just let us know where you are, and we'll
absolutely.
We'll adapt. All right. So thank you guys. I really appreciate you spending the evening with us. Any other questions from the commission? I think our only other order of business is then public comment again. Am I right, Lauren?
Yep.
Do we have any members of the public?
We have 2, but no one has their hand raised.
All right. Well, I personally thought this was an incredibly helpful conversation. So I really I feel like, for me, I feel I've got a much clearer view of a couple of big issues.
Yeah, this is one of our best.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good. Good. It's interesting, and we're happy to help. So I guess we can sign off for the moment, and we'll get back to you very soon.
Thank you. It was good to see you guys.
Night, everyone.
Okay. Thank you all. Yeah. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thanks.
Night.
Yeah. So I think the plan for next time is it'll be just us chickens, and we'll do we're going to focus on the document. We'll see if we have something from the attorneys. Otherwise, trying to do sort of in the 10-minute bites, but that clearly showed up to be too short. And then we'll and why don't we also put on the agenda for next time, Lauren, agenda going forward, and then Joan, we can work on the schedule part. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns while we're all together? Okay, well, good. I thought that this was really good. It was interesting. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night,
Excellent.
guys.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Yeah,
Thank you,
good
Lauren.
Night.
Good
Come
night.
back, Noreen.
Yes.